It's very much over to you. You've heard 3 very different presentations, but very, very common links. And we'd love to hear from you now. Are there questions you'd like around clarification from any one of the panellists, or just general discussion items? It would help actually if you just identified who you are and if you're from one of the organising groups in the consortium or wherever you're from. Okay, this lady here.
Sorry.
Great.
Roisin Gallagher is my name, from Concern. I just had a question for Commandant Jane Lawler, and it was great to hear your presentation. I know Ollie's been involved since the start of the consortium, and the Defence Forces have been involved since the beginning, and it's great now that there's a gender advisor and all the directions you're bringing in. You mentioned in your presentation that we will take action, and I'm just wondering, how does that transpire? Like, after the Rwandan genocide, Colonel Darlier spoke of the Canadian troops and how it was so disheartening because they were mandated under not under Chapter 7. They weren't permitted to the use of force, so they had to watch people being butchered in front of them without doing anything. And if the Irish troops were in a country like DRC where you see people being raped and you're not allowed, you're under the mandate from is not Chapter 7 and you can't respond with violence, or how exactly will you be able to take action?
I was wishing the first question wouldn't come to me, and then I was wishing it wasn't going to be a hard one. You've hit the nail on the head. We're still in a quandary today. It's a UN, and I'm not passing the buck, but it is that feeling of helplessness I spoke about watching the video. I mean, that's the same kind of thing. It's an age-old thing for soldiers. Colonel Barber, did you want to?
Yeah. The basic one under that would be, we would see that as basic human rights. So every soldier serving overseas, he has the law of human rights. So under human rights, the basic thing you do is record, report. So in a case where you have where you're not mandated, and as Jane said, it's only recently the mandates cover that. So in that case, you have the basic responsibility to record and report. That's the basic level. Okay, if you have power of force, you can use that force. But the basic response of all soldiers, be it our civilians within the United Nations, sometimes we over-concentrate on the military aspect of the forces. But a lot of our civilians within the United Nations as well are responsible for a lot of these atrocities. So what we would say the basic requirement in a case like that would be record and report. And you know, every one of us carry very good cameras today. They're called mobile phones. So that's the basic level that we would start at. And then that can be carried back. Like, you look at the war crimes that are going on, and if they're recorded, it's in years' time they will come about. So if we have evidence at that stage, that's what will be pursued. And we have had numerous members of our force attend the war crimes in Europe and give evidence that are well known. In that case, that's what I would say. But it is important that, and we heard it this morning at our meeting, it is very important at a political level, and the Department of Foreign Affairs are very strong on this, that every mandate that comes up must include 1325. But if you look at the language of 1325, it's very weak language. You've heard me speak on this before. Whereas if you look at the mandate on Afghanistan, it's we will. If you look at 1325, we will strive to. It's different language. And I know 1325 was fantastic. It's 11 years in existence, but I wonder how many people actually know. So the basic is record and report. That's the basic that everybody needs in that case.
And just then as a follow-up, what we do is, during the pre-deployment training, there's, and all training is done in a huge range of areas, and we would have an awful lot of lectures on the law of armed conflict, and we'd also on rules of engagement. So our soldiers would be fully briefed on what they can do in certain situations, and they would sit with the legal officer, commanders would sit with the legal officer to go through scenarios. And then there would be, the training would culminate in a large exercise, which would actually, a lot of the time, bring up scenarios that would be sort of, you know, a bit off the wall, that they're trying to test the soldiers to see how they would react to certain situations. And areas like that and gender issues are definitely becoming more prevalent. But I think, yeah, the fact that a lot of the mandates now for particular missions, that they do include the protection of the local population and civilians, is a very important inclusion, and that does help. I think the UN have begun to learn from some of the mistakes that have occurred. So I hope that gives some insight.
So even if the mandate has with non-under Chapter 7, you still can't use force, is that right?
No, you can.
You can, again, it's minimum force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
unproportional, and there are a number. But at the end of the day, if you take action, and if your legal briefing has been correct, if you take action in certain circumstances, that you can justify at a later stage. And that's what we would tell our commanders.
If you go back to General Lear in Rwanda, I mean, he still talks about it and the consequences of that. It's not even that. If you go to Europe, we would say peacekeeping is actually more stressful than war, because we're restricted further under the mandate we serve under. And that can be a huge one. But we like to think of a lot of our mandates as 6.5. As Jane said earlier on, the Irish solution. Okay, 6 is you have to be fired on. You really have to be threatened before we can resort to using protection of ourselves or the population. Chapter 7 is enforcing. We like 6.5, where we can go. And there's a lot of that. And sometimes a lot of people sort of say, well, you didn't open fire. Sometimes, you will agree with Salome, that the show of force in an area can be sufficient to cause people to move on. So we don't have to escalate it to actually opening fire. It's recording, reporting, and a show of force. They're the lower levels of an action by a military force. And that can be sufficient at times to cause people to move on.
The option 6.5, it's a great Irish solution to an Irish problem, isn't it? There's somebody here, I saw a hand just here. No? Okay, sorry. There's a green cardigan lady here. Thanks.
Hi, my name's JeanDenis. I'm a researcher on international conflict management, and I have a question for Salome. Firstly, thanks so much for your presentation. It was amazingly insightful. In July of this year, the Intervention Brigade was sanctioned by the UN, which was the first of its kind with the offensive capacity, and I wanted to ask what you think on that and whether you would like to see more international action in that regard, and as it helped defeat M23 with the being allowed to actually offensively hunt down rebel groups. And yeah, I just wanted to ask what you think about that.
So yes, thank you very much for the question. So I think for us at Congolese level, so seeing these joint forces together, it was not only the UN, it was Congolese army and the UN army together, and then put out the M23. That was very, very good. But again, there is other issues in terms of political, how they fill this gap when M23 will be out, because you know that is not only the problem at M23 level, but there is all governance issues. If now they're putting the national police, who need to keep now the local population, they are well equipped, they have enough resources so they can protect the communities. So one step is done, that is very, very important, but we need to work on other steps. So as a civil society organization, we are trying to take this information, what is happening now after M23, what is the need in the communities, and then to push the national government how they can work now and then cooperate with the local population. So for us, it's a good example because since the war starting in the Congo, there is the UN forces starting in 2000. So almost 14 years they are there. But now this year, it was the first time where they was able to push the army group. So for us, we feel like this is a big engagement now on the ground, and then we need really to celebrate this, and then we need to continue to operate. Because in some time, we feel like the UN, they are not so efficient, what they are doing, they are not protecting people. But at this level, we feel like now there is this engagement at international level to support the communities. But it's not only their duty to support the communities, it's also for the Congolese government. So again, we need to deal with the politics, not only with the army group.
Thank you. This lady with glasses.
Good afternoon. Apologies for the quality of my voice. I'd just like to commend all the speakers. Dervally, your film was riveting in its palpable, raw intensity. Salome, your witness statement, if you like, as being somebody on the ground was very impactful. And Commandant Lawler, I was particularly impressed with the fact that our own military are taking gender issues so seriously. And also, what was very refreshing was the fact that you admitted that, unfortunately, there have been times when our own military have behaved less than they should have done. And oftentimes there's a stereotype with conflict in developing countries particularly, that these are, for want of better words, bushmen or savages who are going around raping everybody in sight. Invariably they're men like any other men, unfortunately, in any part of the world. And just as rapists and abusers come from all levels of society, in our own society, from the highest echelons down to whatever, equally in terms of other countries as well, we have a variety of people who engage in such behaviour. So it's refreshing to see that it's admitted that it's not a case of, if you like, the cavalry coming in, the good guys who are going to save everybody because we're pure and we're perfect, and these are all savages that we're going to deal with. It's important that it's admitted as well that even in our own society we have these issues, gender issues certainly, at whatever level, whether it's abuse, whether it's sexual, whether it's domestic, etc. But I just think it's important that that stereotype be knocked on the head, that we're not the cavalry coming in to save everybody. Unfortunately, we also have flaws. But again, to commend everybody, it's been very insightful, and I'm very appreciative of being invited to attend here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a gentleman down the very back corner.
Thank you. My name is Pierre Unga D. I'm also from the Congo. I'm Universal Ambassador of Peace. I go every time in the Congo, come back here. We are so proud to have, as Salome said in the presentation, that to have Mary Robinson. As I started in for the Congolese community and also Congolese people in the Congo to say that everywhere Mary Robinson goes, he brings change. Everywhere in this. Anywhere, however the circumstances is, you have to bring change. And that was happening in the Congo. But the problem we see when Salome started, the question was, what is the cause? That's where we want to start for. The cause of this violence, sexual violence, was just because of the conflict, because of the war. But we know those who try to support those people who are arming Congolese young people, or let's say Congolese community, because themselves they don't have this capacity to have weapon, guns. They come somewhere. We need to target. We need to tackle these issues by speaking directly to those who provide weapons and those who support them in the Great Lake regions. Let's say, go straight to the point, Rwanda and Uganda. But in this time, no one is standing to say, why do you support this? And also those, the perpetrators, like those in M23 or other rebels, to bring them to the international code. That will be to stop everyone to be afraid not to go anymore to do this kind of things. But after this gathering, what will we expect? Will be any recommendation to say that, or to condemn? Yes, condemning is good, but to say those perpetrators, to bring them to the court, or what will be the outcome of this meeting? What are you hoping to do after this? That was my question.
Okay, could I'd rather make a comment rather than answer your question, because I'm not in any way equipped to make a comment, to answer your question. But I think there will be significant changes, first of all, with the work that Mary Robinson is doing. And I'm very aware of that because I have an opportunity to meet her quite frequently. And she has issued a document called A Framework of Hope.
Yeah.
You may have seen it.
Yes.
It's certainly something that's on the web, and if you have any difficulty getting it, anybody else here, I would be happy to give you information about it. But that sets out her modus operandi, if you like, of having to work with the leaders worldwide, because she has to, but specifically in the region, but also to work from the bottom up. She's adamant that it has to be a top-down and a bottom-up project or process for her to undertake. And all of that to me has been reinforced by the various speakers here, that it is working with the communities, hearing the voices from the communities, empowering women within the communities to speak. And Salome started in I felt a very profound way. She said something like, It was a privilege to be here to celebrate the women of the Congo who were courageous enough to tell their story. And that, to me, is so important. It is getting those voices from the bottom and giving them the conduit to percolate up while getting the action coming from the top as well. It's a long, slow process. There is no magic answer that I'm aware of, but that's just to give you an insight into how Mary's approaching it. Very much top down, bottom up, and hoping to make progress in that way. And she has had some indications that progress has been made. You mentioned the recent laying down of arms by one group, but there are another 50 right behind them waiting to carry on. It happened to be a big group, great, but it's not the end by any manner or means, and it would be very false for anybody to think that it is any more than a step in the right direction. It is one step in the right direction. I don't know how long the path is, but we can all work together. And the consortium, I think we've heard time and time again today, the impact of the groups working together. At the earlier meeting, one of the CEOs referred to joined up thinking on behalf of the Irish government. We have the Defence Forces working with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. That is joined up action, and they have joined in with so many NGOs. Again, so it's Ireland Inc. now that are working together on this incredible issue that should not be so troubling in our world, but is incredibly troubling and is increasing. And the harsh reality is it's spreading, if anything. We haven't heard any figures from the Philippines yet, but I'd say in a year's time we will be talking about the aftermath of another man-made tragedy, a climate event, and the impact of GBV in the Philippines as a result. So we've a long way to go. So I don't think there are answers. I'd love to hear if other people think there are answers that I'm not seeing, but I just think we have to celebrate the tiny steps when they happen. And this is, and with the presence of people like Dervla and Salome and Jane, this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's okay. To celebrate is good, but we know those who perpetrate these atrocities and harm to women. We know them. They are there. And some of them are protected in neighbor countries. We know them. What is missing to bring them to the High Court or to in The Hague? What is missing?
I genuinely don't have an answer to that question. I'm not sure if anybody else does. I have no idea. No, I don't think that's the problem. There are no magic answers to that.
Okay.
Okay. There was a lady just along from you. Yeah.
My name is Shirley Graham. I'm on the monitoring group for 1325. I'd just like to thank all the speakers today. I thought they were all very interesting, very considered and very informative, so thank you. I have a specific question for Jane in the Defence Forces. She won't be surprised.
Don't turn up in uniform the next time and they won't see you.
I just want to say I'm really delighted to hear about the Defence Forces Action Plan and some of the steps that the Defence Forces are taking in post-conflict situations. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the work of the gender focal points and the bottom-up was the way you described it, kind of feedback into the Defence Forces and into peacekeeping missions about the needs of civilian women and men on the ground and how that works in terms of, do the Defence Forces respond in the moment? Can they respond within that mission, practically and policy-wise, to the feedback they're getting from civilians? The other question I have to ask is about, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation about the small numbers of women in the Defence Forces, around about 6%, and the importance within 1325 and more generally within post-conflict situations to have women available on the ground, particularly to talk to women who have experienced gender-based violence and sexual violence. So with that in mind, I'm just wondering, as part of the Defence Forces Action Plan, is there a policy to garner gender perspectives from the small number of women who are currently in the Defence Forces? You talked about encouraging women into more senior ranks and leadership positions within the Defence Forces. So I'm just curious as to those women, a minority in a male-dominated institution, are their experiences being actively recruited and responded to as part of the Defence Forces Action Plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. The reason Shirley knows so much about the Defence Forces is because her recent doctorate thesis was actually on the Defence Forces and our involvement in peacekeeping overseas. And I had the pleasure of reading Shirley's thesis, and I found it extremely informative. And it's nice to get another perspective, not just the military perspective. It's nice to get feedback from outside of our small world. And Shirley, I have a copy of it for you. Okay, the first question about gender focal points. If we talk about an overseas environment, the intention is at the moment that we train at least one gender focal point per section or platoon. A platoon is approximately 30 people, and you generally tend to conduct your operations at a low level within your section or platoon. However, I think it's a good start, but I don't think it's enough. So I would say that everybody should be trained, that we shouldn't have to have gender focal points, and hopefully in 10 years' time there won't be the word gender focal points anymore in existence, because everybody will have the same gender awareness. That's my intention. How do I go about that? It's all about training. When we currently deployed to the UNIFIL about 2 years ago, the UN deployed a civilian gender advisor into Nakura, into the headquarters. And I made contact with her because she trained a few of our personnel. And I said, "Look, Claire, would you mind, can I get a copy of your training program, so, you know, your gender focal point training, so I can get our personnel trained before they go overseas?" And she said, "Yep, we don't have one." So the UN don't have a gender focal point training course. And then I was overseas in Afghanistan, and I was talking to the NATO gender advisor, and I said, "Can I get your gender focal point training?" And she said, "We don't have one." So part of the gender plan, or the action plan, is that I'm going to write one. I'm going to write a gender focal point training course that I can share. There's absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. And that what I'm going to do is try and get the gender perspective and gender awareness into the low level. But I think that's not enough. I think it's a start, but I think in order to get the feedback on the ground, we have to ensure that all our personnel, be they male or female, are fully aware and fully trained in this area. And that leads on nicely to the percentage of females. Absolutely. It was in the news recently that there was a new Rear Admiral promoted, and he just took up his position about 2 weeks ago. He's now the second in command of our entire Defence Forces. And we have a course called Command and Staff course, and you have to do it to get promoted to the highest ranks. And only 3 women have ever done it. And the most recent, or one of the women who did it, she handed in her resignation about 2 weeks ago, and she's due to leave in 2 weeks. So she wrote a thesis during that course that was specific to the Defence Forces and about recruitment and about the barriers that she felt were there for women to get promoted into the higher ranks. And the new DCOS, the new Rear Admiral, just mentioned to me something that he read her thesis and he was quite impressed. And I said, "Oh, did you know she's leaving?" And he said, "No." And I said, "She's leaving." And he said, "Well, I want to speak to you and her in my office before she goes, because I want to learn from her thesis and to get her feedback before she leaves the organisation to see what can we do." As well as that, what we've done is we've started a family-friendly policies working group. So we're trying to look at what we can do to make the Defence Forces as friendly as we can for females, to try and keep the retention of our personnel, to try and ensure and make it easier for them to work in the Defence Forces and also to get to the higher ranks. Because let's face it, we are a male-dominated organisation. The policies were written by men for men. And it's only now that we're getting to the stage where we've women in positions high enough to be able to try and influence those policies and to change them. And luckily, we do have support at the highest level to try and make those changes. So it's a slow process, but we're definitely starting, and hopefully we will make progress.